Hello and good day, and I am super excited to have you here. Excited about the amazing conversations that we have lined up for you. Today, we will be having or sharing our topic to discuss about the cask of Amontillado. But before that, let me introduce myself first. By the way, I am Wellers MC now from AV English 2A. And now, to formally start our discussion, let me introduce to you my group mates. So, let's begin. To present our introduction, the summary about the story of the cast of Amontillado, we have Wellers MC me, and I am going to present the introduction of our topic. And now, for the further discussion, first we have Apple Grace P. Subteniente, and she will be discussing about the author's background of the work, characters and characterizations, and the character web. Second, we have Michelle Jade Castelio, and she will be discussing about the settings, the 10 main events, and the style of the author. And the last but not the least, we have Angela May G. Sigi, and she will be discussing about the complex, the point of view, the themes, and the cultural implications. So for now, let's now start the introduction. The summary about the story of the cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe. The narrator Montresor opens the story by stating that he has been irreparably insulted by his acquaintance, Fortunato, and that he seeks revenge. He wants to exact this revenge, however, in a measured way. Without placing himself at risk, he decided to use Fortunato's fondness for wine against him during the carnival season. Montresor, wearing a mask of black silk, approaches Fortunato. He tells Fortunato that he has acquired something that could pass for Amontillado, a light Spanish sherry. Fortunato, Italian for fortunate, wears the multicolored costume of the jester, including a cone cap with bells. Montresor tells Fortunato if he is too busy, he will ask a man named Lucchesi to taste it. Fortunato apparently considers Lucchesi a competitor and claims that this man could not tell Amontillado from other types of sherry. Fortunato is anxious to taste the wine and to determine for Montresor whether or not it is truly Amontillado. Fortunato insists that they go to Montresor's vaults. Montresor has strategically planned for this meeting by sending his servants away to the carnival. The two men descend into the damp vaults, which are covered with nitre, or saltpeter, a whitish mineral. Apparently aggravated by the nitre, Fortunato begins to cough. The narrator keeps offering to bring Fortunato back home, but Fortunato refuses. Instead, he accepts wine as the antidote to his cough. The men continue to explore the deep vaults, which are full of the dead bodies of the Montresor family. In response to the creeps, Fortunato claims to have forgotten Montresor family coat of arms and motto. Montresor responds that his family shield portrays a huge human fauteuil in a field ashore. The foot crosses a serpent rampant whose fangs are embedded in the heel. The motto in Latin is Nemo me impuni lacesset, that is, no one attacks me with impunity. Later in their journey, Fortunato makes a hand movement that is a secret sign of the Masons, an exclusive fraternal organization. Montresor does not recognize this hand signal, though he claims that he is a Mason. When Fortunato asks for proof, Montresor shows him his trowel, the implication being that Montresor is an actual stone Mason. Fortunato says that he must be jesting, and the two men continue onward. The men walk into a crypt where human bones decorate 3 of the 4 walls. The bones from the 4th wall have been thrown down on the ground. On the exposed wall is a small recess where Montresor tells Fortunato that the Amontillado is being stored. Fortunato, now heavily intoxicated, goes to the back of the recess. Montessor then suddenly changed the slow-footed Fortunato to a stone. Taunting Fortunato with an offer to leave, Montessor begins to roll up the entrance to this small crypt, thereby trapping Fortunato inside. Fortunato screams confusedly as Montessor builds the first layer of the wall. The alcohol sounds worst off, and Fortunato moans, terrified and helpless. As the layers continue to rise, though Fortunato falls silent, just as Montessor is about to finish, Fortunato laughs as if Montessor is playing a joke on him. But Montessor is not joking. At last, after the final plea, for the love of God, Montessor, Fortunato stopped answering Montessor, who then twice calls out his enemy's name. After no response, Montessor claims that his heart feels sick because of the dampness of the catacombs. He fits the last stone into a place and plasters the hole closed. His action accompanied only by jiggling of Fortunato bells. He finally repositioned the bones of the fourth wall for 50 years, he writes. No one has disturbed them. He concludes with a Latin phrase meaning, "May he rest in peace."
A pleasant day, Sir Chester de la Cruz. I am Apple Grace P. Satiniete, second year AB English 2A. And for today's video, I am going to discuss the given topic to our group, which is the Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe in 1846. Author's background. Edgar Allan Poe, a Bostonian in 1809 to 1849, was an American writer who gained fame for his chaotic tales. Poe's life story makes it easy to see where the author got his idea and how his work relates to his experience. First, his father abandoned the family. Then his mother died when he was very young. And his foster father, John Allen, hereditary swung between lenience and extreme discipline. Finally, Poe married his much younger cousin Virginia, who died at an early age. It's no wonder then that Poe's work focused on the macabre, the bizarre, and the outcast. The wonder is that he found a way to make such striking art for his suffering. Before his death at age 40, Edgar Allan Poe raised the American short story to a new level, writing works that completely modernized detective fiction, science fiction, and of course, the horror story. His popular known works include the Poems, The Raven, and the Annabelle Lee. The short stories The Black Cat, The Cask of Amontillado, The Telltale Heart, and The Fall of the House of Usher, and the novel The Narrative of the Gordon Theme of Nantucket. Background of the work. In November of 1846, Edgar Allan Poe published a short story titled The Cask of Amontillado. In short, this story is about a man who desires to get revenge on someone else because of the insult he received. The whole plot deals with the inebriation and ultimately the live burial of the antagonist, Fortunato. The most prominent theme running through this story is the theme of revenge. What makes this story is so popular can be seen in the way it was written. It plays on the people's fears of death and curiosity of live burial. It also plays on the nation of many peoples of way jumping into things and not thinking of the consequences beforehand. Ultimately, these stories allows you to enter your mind of a murderer. This also reflects how view of society in this time period. Characters and characterization. Montresor, the narrator of the short story. He is a complex and intriguing character whose thirst for revenge drives the story. His family motto is Nemo me impunitent, which means no one insult me with impunity, which his drive to murder his friend. Fortunato Montresor, friend and his victim. His name means the fortunate one. He first appeared in Montresor's tale of how he insulted the latter. He took pride in his wine in Consular. Losoche, another wine expert, which Fortunato disliked. He does not appear in the story in person, but Montresor repeatedly mentioned him to Fortunato. Montresor's friend, an unknown person who knows Montresor well, which the latter narrated about his murder of Fortunato. The servant. Montresor ordered his servant not to leave the house. For characters 5, Lucy 3, absent wine expert. Montresor, unbalanced but brilliant, set on revenge. Fortunato, wine expert, proud.
Setting of post-classic short story The Cask of Amontillado takes place at an Italian carnival and later in the depths of Montresor's extensive catacombs. The initial carnival setting creates a chaotic, frenzied mood and cheerful atmosphere juxtaposes Montresor's cruel intentions. While Fortunato and the community celebrate the festival carnival, Montresor executes his murderous plot. The fact that Montresor initiates his evil plan in the midst of a joyous occasion contributes to the horror of the story, as the audience recognize that nowhere is safe from a determined enemy. The carnival setting also allows Montresor to inconspicuously approach Fortunato, who is too intoxicated and distracted by the merry atmosphere to recognize that he is in a grave danger. After the characters travel to Montresor's palazzo, the setting shifts to his extensive catacombs, which are extremely dark, damp, and cold. Inside Montresor's vaults, nightly hangs from the ceiling, skulls and bones line the walls. The various wine bottles are scattered on the floor. The setting creates an ominous, airy mood which reflects Montresor's malicious extension and foreshadows Fortunato's fate. The farther they travel down the boats, the darker the setting becomes and the more Fortunato isolates himself, increasing his vulnerability and playing perfectly into Montresor's hands. Once Fortunato reaches the end of the catacombs, Montresor quickly shackles him to the back wall and builds a rampart around his body. The story horror reaches its climax when the audience realize that Fortunato will be buried alive in the depths of the catacombs, where no one will hear his cries or come to his aid. The main event. The narrator begins by telling us that Fortunato was hurt him. Even worse, Fortunato was insulted him. The narrator must get revenge. He meets Fortunato, who is all dressed up in jester clothes for a carnival celebration and is already very drunk. The narrator mentioned he's found a vial of a rare brandy called Amontillado. Fortunato expresses eager interest in verifying the wine's authenticity. Fortunato and the narrator go to the catacomb of the Montresor family. Apparently, that's where the narrator keeps his wine the narrator leads Fortunato deeper and deeper into a catacomb, getting him drunker and drunker along the way. Fortunato keeps coughing, and the narrator constantly suggests that Fortunato is too sick to be down among the dump squibs and should go back. Fortunato just keeps talking about the Amontillado. Eventually, Fortunato walks into a man-sized hole that's part of the wall. The narrator changes Fortunato to the wall, then begins to close Fortunato in the hole by filling in the opening with bricks. When he was one brick left, he psychologically tortures Fortunato until he begs for mercy. And we finally learn that narrator's name, Fortunato, calls him Montresor. After Fortunato cries Montresor's name, he doesn't have any more lines. But just before Montresor puts in the last brick, Fortunato jiggles his bells. Then Montresor finishes the job and leaves him there to die. At the very end, Montresor tells us that the whole affair happened 50 years ago and nobody was found out. Style of the author: hyperbole. The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I have burned as I best could. Metaphor. He turned towards me and looked into my eyes with two firmly herbs that distilled the rheum of intoxication. Foreshadowing. He had a weak point, this Fortunato, although in other regards he has a man to be respected and even feared. He prided himself on his scholarship in wine. One of the first symbols that show up in his short story is the carnival. Carnivals are massive celebrations and they are viewed as lively and fun. When we think of carnival in this day, we can say that it represents life and energy. In this story, the energy and liveliness of the carnival are juxtaposed with the catacombs, a symbol of evil and death. This all makes sense because Montresor, who killed Fortunato, took him from the carnival and murdered him in the catacombs. Another major symbol in the Cask of Amontillado is Fortunato's jester outfit. This outfit, which includes a conical cap and bells, symbolizes Fortunato's foolishness. Fortunato has, according to the Montresor, insulted his friend many times. It's interesting to notice that despite the insults, Fortunato is still willing to follow Montresor through an underground cemetery. Fortunato's name can also be seen as an ironic symbol, and it represents the misfortune that Fortunato endured at the hands of Montresor. In Italian, Fortunato means fortunate or lucky. The last symbol that's worthy of meaning is Montresor's family crest and motto, which represent Montresor's plan to kill Fortunato and his desire to revenge. Example of imagery: drops of moisture trickle among the bones. I felt the cold, steamy breath of death of my neck. Which senses does the imagery use? Touch, sight, hearing.
The main conflict in the story is between Montresor and Fortunato. Montresor, our narrator, believes that Fortunato has inflicted 1,000 insults upon him. It is because of these insults, which are not named in the story, that Montresor begins to execute his plot for revenge. This conflict would be man versus man. But it is interesting because it seems that Montresor is the only one of the two who is aware of the conflict. Fortunato believes wholeheartedly that the two are friends. The other conflict we see in the story is man versus self. As Montresor places the final brick into the wall, he feels sick for a moment. He tells us it is nothing, but he is an unreliable narrator. He feels sick for a moment with guilt at what he is doing. His revenge plot did not give him the immediate sense of satisfaction he was hoping for, and so we see an internal struggle for but a moment, but it is whose uses of first-person narration establishes a more personal connection between the reader and narrator. Who is the main character? Montresor, who not only uses the first narrative approach, but he also makes Montresor an unreliable narrator. In Method to the Madness, Patrick McGrath states, the Cask of Amontillado is also a superb early example of unreliable narrator at work, having drawn us into Montresor's paranoid with his very first sentence, who will not let us escape, with the use of an unreliable narrator, who lures the audience and forces them to work out the truth behind Montresor's story. The reader is left to think about the actual reliability of the story, that Montresor is telling that of a truth, of that of a lie. The use of first-person narrative gives Montresor the ability to talk in familiar tone, as if he knows the implied listener. You, who so well know the nature of my soul, will not suppose, however, that I gave utterance to a threat. Montresor's relationship in knowing the implied listener, who is seen as his confessor, allows him to fully open up and present each and every little detail about his sin from the very beginning of the story. So the first theme is revenge. Revenge can be considered the main of the Cask of Amontillado theme. The very first line of the story is the 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as I best could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. The next few paragraphs elaborate on what he considers revenge. He speaks of true revenge being one where the person taking revenge does not face any consequences, and the one facing revenge is aware of who has brought about the punishment. This basically outlines the entire plot, where Montresor carefully plans a murder where he will not be caught, and Fortunato will know at the end that it was Montresor who killed him. Montresor comes across as a man who calculates and keeps tracks of every slight and insult towards him. Revenge became an all-consuming obsession after Fortunato commits thousands of injuries and insults upon him. Montresor never allows Fortunato to feel as if he has any dislike towards him, because towards him he knows that for his plan of revenge to work, Fortunato must trust him. So despite his intense hatred, he managed to put on a smiling and friendly face. Part of the reason why the story is so chilling is that this is clearly a premeditated and, in some ways, an emotional murder. The audience is never really given any examples of what Fortunato did to Montresor, and at the end, Fortunato is also unclear of what he did to deserve his punishment. It is interesting to note that Montresor's family motto translates to "No one woods, wants, or attacks me with impunity." This implies that his family has always considered revenge an important element of their honor. So the second theme is delusion. Both of the main characters in the cast of Amontillado suffer from different kinds of delusions. Though Fortunato does come across as foolish, he is never shown to be intentionally evil. Montresor never elaborates on any particular incidents where he felt slighted by Fortunato, and it is possible that he suffered from the delusion that Fortunato was trying to antagonize him when he actually wasn't. So, Montresor also lives in the delusion that revenge is a valid reason to murder someone, even when the perceived insults are not intense but just numerous. The story was terrifying for people when it came out because Montresor is a dispassionate killer who does not feel remorse and is never punished for his crime. Even as an old man, he claims that he would have done the same again. Fortunato, on the other hand, has delusions about his own importance. He considers himself well-liked and respected, and does not realize that most people find him irritating. He is blinded by his own sense of self-importance. Montresor uses this to create a plot to lure him to the catacombs where the murder finally takes place. He also lives in the delusion that Montresor is actually his friend, a trust that Montresor takes advantage of. Even as the pair descend deeper and deeper into the catacombs, Fortunato is unable to perceive or sense danger even as he is being walled in. He is unable to comprehend what is happening, eventually hoping that it is a joke before accepting his fate. So the third theme is substance abuse. So the only drug that is mentioned in the Cask of Amontillado is alcohol, but addiction is a running theme throughout the story. Montresor is addicted to revenge, whereas Fortunato is addicted to feeling important and the intoxicants that make him feel good. The story takes place during Carnival, a time of drunken revelry when people are allowed to behave excessively. The fact that Fortunato is known to love alcohol is an important piece of information for Montresor's revenge plan. He chose Carnival as the time to carry out his plan because he knows that Fortunato will be intoxicated. He uses the lure of a cask of Amontillado, a rare type of brandy, to convince Fortunato to come with him. He further makes sure to continue plying Fortunato with drinks along the way so that he stays drunk and does not feel in danger. Edgar Allan Poe himself battled alcohol and substance addictions in his own life, and many of his stories have the theme of substance abuse in it. In this case, however, it is not the main character who suffers from a substance abuse issue but the object of his vengeance who thus written towards the end of Poe's life. The Cask of Amontillado themes, including substance abuse, can be seen as issues he considered important in his own life. So the fourth theme is freedom. Freedom is another important of the Cask of Amontillado theme. Montresor wants to be free of his desire for revenge and believes the only way is to act upon it. Fortunato is literally walled into a small area at the bottom of catacomb. It is interesting to consider why Montresor chose this method of murder. Apart from being the perfect way of hiding away a body, he may be motivated to take away Fortunato's freedom the same way Fortunato's insults build up into an all-encompassing hatred that took away Montresor's freedom of thought. So, the Cask of Amontillado reflects and shows some of the societal views of the late 1840s. For one, alcoholism was very prevalent in that past society, so it wouldn't be surprising to anyone that a story from this era would have a driving force such as that of alcoholism. In that era, it was generally okay for people to drink more so than today. Secondly, gruesome deaths were very much a part of everyday life for the 1840s people. Every day, many criminals were put to death by means of the guillotine. In the Cask of Amontillado, a gleam of death is the end of a man's life and the end of the